Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today, we're going to be breaking down the top head coaching candidates for the Pittsburgh Steelers if head coach Mike Tomlin decides to step away from the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason, or maybe the Steelers fire him. I'm guessing that probably won't happen, but there's a possibility, in my opinion, Tomlin could step away from the team this offseason to pursue other opportunities. If that happens, who should the Steelers bring in? That's what we're going to be talking about today here on Steelers Talk after the Steelers lost 30-6 in the playoff game yesterday versus the Houston Texans, and we'll officially kick off our 2026 offseason here on Steelers Talk with some Mike Tomlin replacements. But predict it for me to kick off today's show. Will Mike Tomlin be back this season or next season, whatever you guys want to call it, the 2026 season? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comments section to get us started, and make sure you tell me why down there in the comments as well. So first things first, I will say that I do think Mike Tomlin will most likely be back for his 20th season as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2026. I think that this front office and this ownership group thinks that this team is pretty close, and I think last year the theme of that offseason was change, where you bring in DK Metcalf and you trade for Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey. You bring in Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot of new with that team in 2025, and I think this year the theme might be continuity. You keep Mike Tomlin, you probably make a change at defensive coordinator, but you bring back Arthur Smith. If Rodgers wants to come back, he can come back. If Cam Hayward comes back, he comes back. And this roster, it's mostly set with players that are under contract, veterans, that you could run back for another season. And hey, man, you can make an argument. If you have a couple of decent separators in your wide receiver room yesterday against the Texans, you might have a much better chance to win that football game. So I think that this ownership group, front office, they probably think they're not that far away, and they probably think they're one good offseason away from winning playoff games again with Mike Tomlin. So I don't think they want to let him go. I just don't think that, Art Rooney has the balls, plain and simply, after a division championship, after a double-digit win season, to fire the only head coach, in Steelers history since the Super Bowl era. I mean, they've only had 3 coaches in the Super Bowl era, and they're very proud of the fact that they've never fired a head coach. So I don't think that's going to start now after a 10-win season and a division championship and a playoff berth. So, but something that could happen is Mike Tomlin could walk away. He could decide that he's had enough here in Pittsburgh and decide to pursue other opportunities. I do think that, he wouldn't take that much time off. I think he would want to be traded this offseason and coach next season for somebody. But I do think there's a world where Mike Tomlin could decide that, he doesn't want to coach the Pittsburgh Steelers anymore. And honestly, I think it could come down to the decisions of, the 2 older players that we're going to be awaiting decisions on as to whether or not they want to come back next year or not, and that is Aaron Rodgers and that is Cam Hayward. I think if both of these guys want to come back, if they return, I think Tomlin is almost for sure back. I think he feels almost a little bit of an obligation to these 2 guys, especially Cam Hayward, to deliver him a championship before he retires. But if Cam retires this offseason, he no longer has that obligation or, that weight on his shoulders. And he failed getting Cam Hayward a Super Bowl championship before he retired, and honestly, not that many playoff victories. And then Aaron Rodgers, same thing goes for him. They have an awesome relationship. He loves coaching Aaron. Aaron loves playing for Mike. It was very clear Aaron was pissed off about the way people were talking about Tomlin in his press conference after the game last night. That relationship is definitely tight. And if Rodgers wants to come back for another year, I think Tomlin would want to come back. But if both Rodgers and Cam Hayward retire, I could see Tomlin stepping away, because there's not a ton that's still keeping him here in Pittsburgh in terms of obligations or, big ties or anything like that. But just think about it. If you're Mike Tomlin and you're sitting here with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Rodgers is retiring. You got to get a new quarterback again this offseason. Cam Hayward's retired. You can't get him a Super Bowl championship before he retires, all that different stuff. Okay, you're looking at Mike Tomlin. You're like, do you really want to go out and get another quarterback this offseason? There's not a lot of great options out there, whether it be via free agency, via trade, or via the draft. Like, honestly, if Rodgers isn't coming back, if I'm Mike Tomlin, maybe I would want to go to a place that already has a quarterback, like the New York Giants with Jackson Dart, or the Tennessee Titans with Cam Ward. If I'm Mike Tomlin and I'm looking at the quarterback landscape this year, year, and I don't like what I see outside of Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers isn't going to be back next year, I would think about maybe moving on, and maybe now is the right time after 9 seasons without a playoff win. Maybe he feels like it's the right thing for both sides to move on, get Pittsburgh a couple of decent draft picks, and allow this franchise to move on without him. I could certainly see that being a possibility, but like I said, I think Cam Hayward and Aaron Rodgers probably have to retire in order for that to be a possibility. So I guess we'll see what happens. I don't think either of them are going to retire. I think they'll come back for one more season. But if Tomlin does decide to step down, let's talk about some potential new head coaching options on today's show. And I do have 3 things that I'm looking for on my checklist. The first thing that I'm looking for is a charismatic leader of men and a good organizational leader. This is the one thing that Tomlin does really, really well, in my opinion. Those players will go to war for him. You better believe in exit interviews, they're going to be fighting for Mike Tomlin to come back this year, or talking about 2026. But if someone's going to replace Mike Tomlin, man, it's got to be somebody that can command that meeting room. It's going to have to be somebody that these players look up to and that they're willing to go into battle for and run through a wall for. So that's number 1. Number 2, staff building connections. I mean, this has been one of the weaknesses of Mike Tomlin, in my opinion. I want somebody with connections to get some nice OC and DC candidates, all those different things. And then the final thing I want is an innovative mind on their side of the football, somebody that can bring a schematic advantage to the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into 2026 and beyond. And coming up here on Steelers Talk, my top 10 Mike Tomlin replacements for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to go from 10 to 1, and we'll finish up today's show with my favorite replacement here and my favorite head coaching candidate if Mike Tomlin moves on from the black and gold this offseason. But before we get into the rest of today's show, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And it is officially the new year, guys. 2026 is here, and in my opinion, this is the best time of the year for watching sports. Bowl games, playoff games, basketball and hockey season are now in full swing as well, and it's all happening all at once. And while all that action is going on, there's one place where it feels so good to be right, and that's Prize Picks. Prize Picks is super simple to play. Just pick more than or less than on at least 2 player stat projections, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. My favorite feature about Prize Picks is that how you play is up to you guys. If you want a little bit more flexibility, you can choose the flex play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you're feeling really strong about your lineup and want a bigger payout, you can go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test and make some money. That is, if you know ball. For example, for this weekend's playoff game against the Texans, we took the less on passing yards for C.J. Stroud. Didn't get that. We took the more on Kenneth Gainwell receptions. We did get that one, but unfortunately Pat Freiermuth, I guess, was invisible yesterday, and they didn't want to throw it to him, so we didn't get the more on the receiving yards. So download the Prize Picks app today if you haven't already. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, we'll start my list here with Brian Daboll. And honestly, guys, towards the end of this list, it's not my favorite, candidates, but I do think Brian Daboll is somebody that if he can get another coaching opportunity with, maybe a better GM, I think that he could be a good head coach in this league. He does have that big personality that can command a room. He is a bright offensive mind. I'm really dead set on that. I really like his offensive scheme when he's got a capable quarterback. He does have QB developmental stuff as well. He has been a coordinator both in college and in the pro game. Did a good job developing Josh Allen in Buffalo. Did a pretty darn good job with Jackson Dart, getting him ready for his first NFL action this year as well. So I look at him as somebody that understands the college game and the transition to the pro game, the differences, all those different things, and he makes it easier on these younger quarterbacks to transition to the pro game. And he's also got connections to the Nick Saban coaching tree, which could be very nice for building out a staff and getting a nice defensive coordinator, etc. He didn't do a great job with his DCs in New York, but I think, given another opportunity, you could do worse than Brian Daboll as the next head coach of the Steelers. Number 9, another one that I'm not super thrilled on, but again, this is towards the end of my top 10 list, not in the front. Mike McCarthy, this is somebody obviously that's got a pretty decent track record. He's a Super Bowl champion, over 170 career wins as a head coach, over a 60% career win percentage. Unlike Mike Tomlin, this guy, he's very similar to Mike Tomlin, only he's the offensive version of him. He doesn't win playoff games very often, but he is a Pittsburgh native. He would understand what this job would mean, all those different things to the city, all those different things. He would be a good representative, for the city, all those different things. And he does have a very nice modern spread-style offense. It helped develop Dak Prescott into one of the best mental processors in football. So that is something that Mike, has in his profile that is somewhat enticing. But my two concerns with Mike McCarthy bringing him in is, number one, not really a ton of great playoff track record from his part. So, is he really the guy that's going to be coming in here and getting playoff wins for the Pittsburgh Steelers? I don't know about that. And then also, who does he hire as his DC? He had some really bad defensive coordinator hires there in Dallas. He's not really connected to anybody that I would want as a DC here in Pittsburgh right now. Moving on to number 8, we get to Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator in Green Bay, runs a modern defense. He's got connections to the Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, coaching tree. You could do worse than Jeff Hafley. I'm not sure about his leadership ability. I know he's been a head coach before, but I don't know if he's the strong personality I think this team would need if they're going to move on from Mike Tomlin. But somebody that I think does have that personality and would bring the juice and the energy every single day is Robert Saleh, the current defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I know what you guys are saying at home, no retreads, all this different stuff, but, Saleh, I think, he's one of these guys that if he gets a second opportunity, he could make the most of it. He does have a lot of really good connections to offensive play callers. Unfortunately, he picked 2 really bad play callers in his time in New York, but he's still got connections to Clay Kubiak and Chris Forster and all these, and Brian Greasy and all those guys in the Niners building, not to mention the guys that were formerly in the Dolphins building. He could still put together a pretty decent staff. What he's done in San Francisco this year with no Fred Warner, no Nick Bosa has been super, super impressive. They've been making it work with guys that you shouldn't be able to make it work with. And right now they're in the divisional round of the playoff. The defense has really stood up this season, and Saleh deserves a lot of credit for that. He's not my number one option, but he's one that I would consider as an acceptable hire if the Steelers were to bring him in. Number 6, I'm going to go with Chris Shula. And, Shula's already been connected to the Pittsburgh Steelers. His grandfather, Don, one of the greatest head coaches of all time, was kind of the mentor for Chuck Noll, of course, the great coach here in Pittsburgh. So that kind of family connection has connected Shula to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think he'd be a good hire, man. Sean McVay does an excellent job getting these guys ready to run NFL programs, and Shula is a really great defensive mind. They've got a really young, inexperienced, and really inexpensive defense there in LA, and they've done a good job building up that defensive line. They've made do with, honestly, one of the least talented secondaries in football. I think that Shula would be a good hire, and obviously he's got all the connections to all the top guys on the offensive side of the ball there in LA, which is a gold mine for offensive play calling talent. So certainly I think Chris Shula would be a good hire here in Pittsburgh. Now I got a couple names here that maybe won't be at the top of everybody's list, but I think they'd be good fits here in Pittsburgh. We'll start with Anthony Campanelli, the defensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Campanelli, if you haven't listened to his various speeches in front of the Miami Dolphins defense on their in-season version of Hard Knocks a couple years ago, go watch them. I mean, you watch those things, you're ready to run through a brick wall for this guy. Then he went to Green Bay last year, learned under Jeff Hafley, actually, about this new school kind of McDonald's-style defense that they're running with all the quarters and 2 high safeties and simulated pressures. And then he took it to Jacksonville this year and completely turned around that unit. So, not only, is he bringing a new school defensive scheme, but he's also got good connections to maybe Grant Udinsky, their offensive coordinator, would come over with him. He doesn't call plays. Liam Cohen does there in Jacksonville. And then also, he's got connections to the Mike McDaniel wing of the Sean McVay, of the Kyle Shanahan tree as well. You could bring in Frank Smith or somebody else, or Darrell Bevel as his offensive coordinator, somebody that's worked under Mike McDaniel, or maybe even McDaniel himself if he doesn't get a head coaching job. So Campanelli, somebody with that big personality, he'd bring a schematic advantage advantage to the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion. He's got good connections to offensive coordinator candidates. I think he's an underrated head coaching candidate for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then Anthony Weaver, another guy that I think is underrated. This guy, former player, and if you just listen to Anthony Weaver talk about football, man, this guy is exactly the kind of strong personality that can replace a guy like Mike Tomlin in the Steelers locker room as the leader of this group that can get buy-in from these players. He's not a house mouse in there. I don't think that type of personality leading this team is what this team needs after a Mike Tomlin, led tenure. I think you need somebody that preaches violence, all those different things like Weaver does, and then also, he brings over the Mike Macdonald style defense as well with the two high safeties, the simulated pressures, all the stuff we see from Macdonald there in Seattle. Obviously, Weaver learned that from Macdonald in Baltimore. It's why he got the Miami job, and he's been tabbed as a future head coach by multiple different teams, including people in that Miami organization. So I think that would be an underrated hire. And again, he's got connections to Frank Smith, their former OC in Miami, Mike McDaniel himself, Darrell Bevel, their quarterbacks coach. They got a lot of different options that Weaver could use at his disposal. Number 3, these are my top 3 guys that I would absolutely love and be jumping for joy for. We'll start with Clint Kubiak, the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator. Now, I'm not sure if Cliff is like the biggest personality in the world, but like what's really considered the gold standard head coaching hire in the National Football League nowadays, guys, is somebody that's young, somebody that's offensive-minded, somebody that's a first-time head coach and has recent play calling success. And the only person in this entire, coaching pool, at least so far, that fits all 4 of these criteria is Clint Kubiak, who has called plays for a number of different teams, and he has built one of the best offenses in football with the Seattle Seahawks in just one season there in Seattle. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. He's gotten the most out of a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's a modern offense, that really bases under center with the play-action game, something that I would love to see here in Pittsburgh, even if I'm a little bit unsure about the leadership ability. As long as he's given us that style of offense, I don't really care if he's bringing the leadership qualities there that some of these other players and other, not players, but coaches would bring to the table. Number 2, if the Packers do decide to let go of Matt LaFleur for whatever reason, it does sound like LaFleur is likely going to be staying in Green Bay, but if the Packers are stupid enough to let him go, I would be all over Matt LaFleur, man. He's got an excellent record, one of the best win percentages in the National Football League. And obviously that's been buoyed by some really good quarterback play, but he's also helped elevate some of those quarterbacks. He gave Aaron Rodgers, a second win there at the end of his career when it looked like he was starting to, dwindle down a bit, and he got him 2 more MVPs. Jordan Love obviously has become, considered a top 15 at the very least quarterback in the league. Some people consider him top 10 in the league in his offense, and, he's done a good job developing that quarterback talent. Also, he's only missed the playoffs 1 time in 7 years in Green Bay. Now, obviously, never been to a Super Bowl. He's been stopped at the NFC Championship game a couple of times. And, certainly there's a reason why Green Bay fans, some of them are done with him in Green Bay. But, I think that he's a very stable organizational leader. I think he does bring a schematic advantage to the offense. And, I really do doubt that Green Bay moves on from him because, frankly, it'd be the stupid move to move on from Matt LaFleur, in my opinion. But if they do move on from him, I would be all over him as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers if we had an opportunity to do so. But my number 1 pick to replace Mike Tomlin as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers is Brian Flores. It has been for multiple years at this point. If the Steelers were ever to move on from Mike Tomlin, I've always said Brian Flores would be my number 1 guy, and there's a number of reasons why I think Brian Flores is perfect for the Pittsburgh Steelers, guys. Instant credibility inside the Steelers locker room. These players, a lot of them, and a lot of the big names know Brian Flores. He coached here back in 2022. Instant credibility inside the locker room. He's also got a big personality. He's got a lot of charisma. He commands a room when he is in the meeting room, man. That is something that's been abundantly clear from everybody that's, been in the building in Miami when he was there and in Minnesota and in Pittsburgh. Like, this guy can command a room, and he's a big personality, and he knows how to control an organization. Also, he's a defensive mastermind, man. Some of the split field stuff that he has done with blitzes while using both palms and quarters with different match coverages and the cover zero looks and the pre-snap disguises and the post-snap rotations, when you think of a modern NFL defense, you think of a Brian Flores defense, man. And then also he's got ideal offensive coordinator connections. He's connected to Grant Udinski. If you want to bring him in from Jacksonville, he was in Minnesota with Flores for a couple of years. You can bring in Josh McCown if you would like to bring him in. If he was willing to come in here, Wes Phillips, the current OC in Minnesota, he doesn't call plays. I'm sure he would love to call plays here in Minnesota. So having that connection to the Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay tree, I think is the ideal offensive coordinator connections there. But you might be saying, but Jack, can he help develop a young quarterback? Because if you hire a new head coach, part of that new head coach's job description is to eventually draft and develop a new franchise quarterback, or maybe bring in like Malik Willis and try and foster him into your franchise quarterback, a younger guy. But listen, man, I understand that with Tua, he was a different person back then. All right, like all he knew in the NFL at that point was Belichick style, tyranny, where you pretty much hold your entire team under a dictatorship, and you are the main guy and all this different stuff. The modern NFL is more player-friendly. It's more Sean McVay and Mike Tomlin and Kevin O'Connell, where they are more collaborative with the players instead of, completely tyrannizing them. And I think that Brian Flores has learned that lesson working for Mike Tomlin and Kevin O'Connell. I think he's become a much more player-friendly coach. And I think that he would bring that to the next job that he gets as a head coach in the National Football League. Also, I actually think Flores, did pretty decent in Miami. He took some pretty bad rosters there, turned them into top 10 defenses. Obviously, they didn't draft the right quarterback, but according to reports, Flores wanted to draft Justin Herbert over Tua Tagovailoa, and the owner, Stephen Ross, and GM Chris Greer overrid him. So that is not on, Brian Flores. They picked the wrong QB, but Flores, had the right QB in mind. So keep that in mind as well. But personally, guys, I think Flores, because he's already been in the building, he understands what this, culture is about. I think that, he brings a better defensive philosophy than what we've had here in Pittsburgh. He brings a younger, fresher voice into this locker room, and I think he'd be the perfect and ideal fit to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But who's your guy? Let me know down there in the comment section. I'm a Coach Flo guy. Let me know who you guys would support as the top option to replace Mike Tomlin if he ends up stepping down as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, before I go, I do have some honorable mentions because I'm sure there's going to be people in my comments saying, what about this guy? What about this guy? Whatever. But I'm going to go, with these guys as my honorable mentions. Nick Saban, man, I think that's just too unlikely to put on the list, but I would love Nick Saban, actually. Another chance at the NFL, a new challenge for him. I think he's got awesome OC candidates. If he were to be hired here, he could put together one of the best staffs in football. There would be free agency, cachet, because, a lot of players that play in the NFL played under Saban at Alabama, so there would be players that would want to come here to play for him again, all that different stuff. He's definitely got a great culture building mindset with the process and all that different stuff. So I think Saban, if he wants to come out of retirement, would be honestly a pretty decent fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But John Harbaugh, honestly, I think he's overrated. I think he's worse than Mike Tomlin as a head coach. So, to replace Tomlin with a guy like Harbaugh, I wouldn't be too interested. Doesn't give you anything in terms of schematic advantage. And if you're talking about teams, underwhelming in the playoffs, I mean, the Baltimore Ravens are number one example. Mike McDaniel, don't think he has the leadership chops to take over for a guy like Mike Tomlin. Kevin Stefanski, kind of a milquetoast offense, if I'm being honest with you, but he can run an organization. Bill Belichick, I mean, old guy, complete tyrant, all these different things. I'm not too interested in him, but he's the greatest head coach in the history of the NFL, in my opinion, so I wanted to include him. Vance Joseph, some decent, OC connections to the Sean Payton tree. He runs a really unique and really awesome defense that could be, really beneficial here in Pittsburgh, but not the strongest leader in the world, in my opinion. Jesse Minter, not a ton of offensive coordinator connections. The Harbaugh tree offensively is kind of dog shit, if I'm being completely honest with you. And then Arden Durd, the defensive coordinator for Seattle. I'd have to interview him to see if I like the personality, if I think he can be a strong leader, but doesn't call plays in Seattle. I think that would be a little bit of a risk, but I think that would probably be acceptable if you end up hiring him. But that'll be it for today's show, guys. Type those real ones down there in the comment section if you made it to the end of today's show, and if you are with the Pittsburgh Steelers, no matter who their head coach is, no matter what's going on, if you bleed black and gold, make sure you type those real ones so we can give you some love down there in the comment section. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. going to get another video out to you guys here this afternoon, probably film takeaways for Steelers versus Texans, let you guys know what went wrong in yesterday's game. It's probably going to be a lot, but make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Until next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.